Welcome to the Passive Investing Show. I'm Ashley Wilson, and I'm joined here today with my co-host, Jay Scott. Jay, how are you doing?
I am doing awesome. How are you doing, Ashley?
I'm doing great. On today's episode, we get to listen to another one of your live broadcasts at the GoBundance Miami event not too long ago, and it is with Aaron West and Daniel Del Real.
Yeah, these guys are great. So Aaron and Daniel are kind of well known within the GoBundance community, and they run a show. And this show, unfortunately for us, is private to GoBundance. So if you want to hear their podcast, their show, you have to be a member of GoBundance. But they run a show called the 728 Show. The number 728. And basically that stands for 7 figures to 8 figures in net worth. And they interview other members of GoBundance who have gone from 7-figure net worth to 8-figure net worth. And they talk all about how they got there, the lessons learned, the pitfalls. It's just an amazing resource for GoBundance members. So we're not on the 728 show here, but I had the opportunity to interview them to talk about their investing strategies, both active and passive, and also get some of the lessons that they've learned from some of the guests that they've had the opportunity to interview over the past couple of years. So I know you've listened to the episode, Ash. Any things that stood out for you?
The episode was probably one of my favorite out of the group of episodes. I mean, they were all terrific. But the things that I liked about this episode was there were a lot of their personal philosophies integrated with how they invest and how they structure their investments. It was also interesting too, how they were able to go from investing 70% of their income to 80%. I thought that was very interesting to learn how they structure their passive investments coupled with their active investments as well. So I don't want to give away too much of the episode, but I think it just has incredible little takeaways, whether you're into more of the philosophy behind how someone invests, or you like more tangible how to invest and why do you invest. So I think this episode covers the full gambit of what passive investors are looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so without any further ado, let's welcome Daniel Del Real and Aaron West to the show. Aaron, Daniel, welcome to the Passive Investing Show.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, always good to see you, man.
So we are here live at the GoBundance event in Miami. And I do want to mention you guys, and this is kind of a teaser for everybody out there that's not a GoBundance member, that's not familiar with GoBundance, but you guys are hosts of a show called the 728 Show. It is exclusive for GoBundance members, and you interview ultra-high net worth individuals who have 8-figure net worth, and you talk about how they got from 7 figures, maybe how they got from 5, 6, 7 figures to 8 figures, so that the GoBundance members can learn about building wealth and acquiring wealth and growing wealth. I'd love to hear a little bit about that show, and encourage anybody that's listening that might be interested in that show to check out GoBundance, because the best way to get access, or the only way to get access to that show, is through GoBundance. But I'd love to hear a little bit about that show, but I'd also love to hear about you guys personally as well. So can we start with, let's say, Aaron, tell us a little bit about yourself, what your background is.
I am the oldest of 6 kids, so we grew up poor. So most of my life was learning to address the issues that I had with money, quite frankly. And I got introduced to GoBundance in 2014, before I even had the net worth to be a part of GoBundance. And, have really just grown since 2014 with the investments. I have a residential real estate team in Modesto, California. Daniel and I are both from Modesto. I don't do transactions anymore, so I just basically run the business. It's much more of a passive business now. I've got people in place that really run most of it. Have a couple of other businesses, and then of course investments with residential real estate and commercial and multifamily.
Awesome. Daniel.
I'm a first-generation American. My parents were immigrants that came from Mexico. I served 4 years in the Air Force prior to starting my real estate career almost 20 years ago. I also operate a team. We were the fifth largest, highest producing team in California, which is cool. Also get myself out of that production and just running that team. But also some of the time that I spend, I also have and built an investment portfolio that include a lot of LP positions and also things on my own balance sheet, and also I'm also the host or the co-host with Mr. Aaron West of the 728 show, part of the Go Abundance family.
Awesome. So I want to talk a little bit about just your investing thesis on the passive side. So obviously you're both ultra successful from the real estate side, running real estate teams and creating active income, which I'd love to talk about, but not the focus of this show. So what is your kind of investing thesis on the passive side? So you make all this income. How do you think about how you then invest that income passively?
You want me to start? Okay, so the big thing is we were fortunate enough to be in an industry and a business that allows us to make as much money as we want, right? Sales. So whenever that's the case, what really allowed me to build wealth is separation of that money, right? Where we put ourselves on a living expense, I would say budget. Aaron doesn't like to use the budget word, but we wanted to really make sure we separated ourselves from that money so we can have stewardship to utilize that money to build the business, right? And at the same time to utilize that money to plant seeds in the harvest of our investments, right? Operating the business that we have, where the income could be really high. Like initially, my goal was to live on 10-15% of that income and then invest 70% of the rest, which is interesting because once you have those principles in place and you're a steward of that money, or like a man's wealth is his ability to live without. Like, can you go without this new car? Can you invest this for future return? Those same principles that I learned 10 years ago by doing that, I still honor those now. Yeah, of course, my lifestyle has gone from not $110,000 a year now. I mean, I spent $100,000 on vacations last year alone, right? We're at $400,000 a year in passive. But the principle, 4 years, $400,000 a year in living expenses. But the principles are the same, right? And the only difference now is I don't invest 70% of the income that I make. I invest 80% of the income that I made. The number's just much larger, right? So those principles I had initially and the consistency of honoring those principles has served me to continue to build those orchards.
Yeah, and so it's funny because as you're saying that, I'm sitting here thinking you were a service member for a long time. Thank you for your service. But it just kind of reminded me that freedom only comes with sacrifice, and it's very much the same in the financial world. And you're only going to achieve financial freedom if you're willing to sacrifice. And as you said, as you grow your net worth, hopefully it's more freedom, less sacrifice. But especially starting out, you're never going to have any freedom without sacrifice.
Yeah, and for me, it was because I was dealing with my relationship with money. Investing for me was how I convinced myself that I was broke again. So every time I would have enough money to make an investment, I would go buy a property or find a position and put myself back to zero so that I could continue with the lifestyle that I led, which was back against the wall. And there was a transition of one day waking up and going, there's no way that I can convince myself that I'm broke anymore. And that kind of changed everything. How we invest, and to answer your question about how we invest, I invest in the person and the jockey more than just about anything else. A lot of the investments that we've done with GoBundance members and people that we've met, it's because they're winners. And I'm sure a lot of the people on this show get hit up with deals all the time, or funds or syndications and all these different things of people who, and Daniel talks about this really eloquently, of people who have read a book but they've never been through the trials of what that looks like. And I think that there's going to be a lot of people that are going to have a reckoning at some point in the not too distant future with the way the market has changed. So I just make sure that the people that I'm aligning with in my investments or partnerships or those kinds of things are with ones that have, been through the struggle.
Revealed knowledge
versus learned knowledge. So that's probably the most important thing to me. I will do a deal that doesn't have the numbers of someone else because I trust the person and I know they're going to be able to bring to fruition what they say they're going to do.
Yeah, I love that. And in my experience, the best people have the ability to pivot. There are plenty of people out there that can put together a business plan for an investment and start executing. And if everything goes great, fantastic. But as we all know, everything doesn't always go great. And it's those that know how to pivot and that know how to mitigate and deal with risks and things like that. Those are the people that are ultimately going to be successful.
I use this analogy with my team, and I just started using it because I see there being a pivot in the market right now. And I use the illustration of when you milk a cow and you have whole milk, right? When you set that pail down, instantly there's a layer of cream that starts to come to the top, and it's a thin layer of cream at first, and then over time more cream will come to the top of that milk, right? I'm trying to find the people that are the cream at the very top, so that when this market shifts, they're the first to pivot, because those that are first to pivot are the ones who are able to take care of or take advantage of the opportunities that are in every single market. And so, that's who I look for, are people that are going to be able to adapt quickly and be that cream at the very top.
I really want to. So we're going to get to the whole market and pivot and how do we do some of that risk mitigation. Before we do that, I'd love to talk about a little bit more detail. What are your investments? So you both mentioned real estate. Are you buying single-family houses that you're managing yourself, or putting out to property management teams? Are you investing in syndications as LP investors, other investments? What does your portfolio look like?
Yes.
Go ahead. So I think you need to have a combination of everything, right? So I invest when I'm investing in an LP position, because I do have that, and I know some of your listeners listen to that. I look at not only return on investment, I'm looking at the operator, I'm looking at return on my mental capacity. Like, what am I doing with my free time when I'm investing and deploying my money? They're going to steward my money. Number one, if somebody's going to steward your money, you need to diversify that risk with more than one operator and different asset classes. And then you're also looking at the return on that. I would say that the return on the relationship capital too, right? It's like, okay, investing in this deal, does it give me access to future things or this person's world, right? So it's important to have that part of it. But then at the same time, buying property for yourself teaches you those lessons that you need as well. So, and I'm pushing Aaron on this right now, because initially we started our investment career very much the same. We're buying single-family homes. I bought my first house when I was 22, which was 18 years ago, and I just haven't stopped buying. And it wasn't very sexy. There was a lot of singles and doubles until it got sexy, meaning equities and the equity debt leverage lessons I created because of the consistency. I created mastery in it. And that's where Aaron is as well. And I had an opportunity to pivot in 2017, and there was a point that I was, at over 70 doors in California that I had, and we got rid of about half of them and leveled up the asset class, which then says, okay, let's level up the asset class. So like Aaron and I bought a commercial property, we bought apartment buildings and stuff like that together. And now it's getting sexy, and the same thing goes with even the LP investments that we started. The consistency of our investments in LP deals. My first one was in 2014, and I've been really consistent. Initially, starting with 100,000 in a deal, and then last year I did $1 million, and year to date I've done 500,000. Where that consistency of that plan, and again the diversification of the LPs and how I do that. It's created a windfall of capital events in my life as well. So you need to have a combination of both, because you have to learn the unsexy first and the lessons that you learn on playing the small ball, and then in 5-10 years you'll have an opportunity to level up. But at the same time, I might make a better return on my investment if I do it myself, but it won't be the best return on my mental capacity sometimes, and yet I won't get a return on the potential of the relationship capital that we have having access and surfing in others' wakes. So all in all, that's really what it is. So as we start getting capital events that come back, we're taking down larger properties.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack there, and I want to go back to something that you just touched on twice. We talked about this a little bit, you and I, yesterday when we were chatting, and I thought it was an absolutely fantastic point. You mentioned relationship capital, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. I don't remember exactly how you said it, but yesterday you said something to the effect of sometimes it's almost worth losing money to build a relationship or to generate a relationship. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that and maybe give an example of how you've done that in your career?
Yeah, so sometimes there's two types of relationships I look at. There's short-term relationships, short-term people, long-term relationships with long-term people, and it goes back to that, like short-term relationships, short-term people. You're looking at I'm in a group of people. How can I make the most I can out of these opportunities and relationships? And you're gonna get those people in your life, right? But then you have long-term relationships with long-term people. So if this relationship with Jay and I, like, how can I earn that relationship with time? Because now with long-term people, like, how can I make Jay more wealth? Like, how can we're looking to make one, like, you looking to make me more wealth, and I'm looking to make you more wealth. It's a long-term relationship. And sometimes what you have to do is you have to earn those relationships. And like, I'll give you an example through GoAbundance, and it's David Osborne, one of the elders. And I remember in 2014 when I first met him at a One Life event, I invested in my first LP because he was one of the guys, and so was Andrew Cushman, which I'm not sure if you've interviewed him before, Tim Rode, Mike McCarthy. Like, those were the elders that were inviting me to be on this tribe of millionaires of abundance. So I'm like, I'm putting my money where my mouth is. And I remember I wrote a $100,000 check, and I invested in that apartment building. And we came to my first event, and it was a room full of entrepreneurs. Everybody was trying to get these elders' attention, right? And instead, I decided to earn it by putting my money where my mouth is and investing in that relationship capital. So I made sure that anytime I saw like Osborne invest in something, I wanted to be the second largest investor, so that way my name was in front of them all the time. And I'm like, okay, am I going to make, one was a development deal. I'm like, am I going to make money on this? I don't know. It's a risk. But the return on the relationship and the access was invaluable. We're to a point where, I was in Puerto Rico last year, and I get a call from David, says, hey, I got some inside baseball. You got to put $200,000 in this deal right now. And I'm like, from Puerto Rico, I got off my phone, put it up, wired $200,000. I'm like, done, right? And so it just goes back, those relationships are earned, and sometimes it's not looking at the best return on investment, right? It's return on mental capacity, the return on that relationship capital too that you would have.
And I would add to that too, that it's not always, you don't necessarily buy your way into those deals either. It's about relationships. And so when you have the opportunity to meet someone and connect with someone, there's always a place that people bring value, and I could never give David Osborne financial advice. That's not where that relationship capital is for me. But I have boys, and he doesn't know how to deal with. I mean, he has a small son, and he's never had boys before, and so we created a really great relationship. I got the same call that Daniel did on that deal, and so it's always playing the long game. And one of the best pieces of advice that I got, and for a lot of the guys that are passive investors, they understand this, is that you're always trying to hit base hits. And as long as you're hitting consistent base hits over time, you can't help but win. So as the wealth started to build, and for me, I was really vertical with residential real estate for a long time. And then I started reaching out and started getting other legs to the business, and investing in multifamily, and then investing in some funds, and then investing in some fintech and that kind of stuff. So
I want to add something to it, just because it's for us. So I'm kind of thinking of even the relationship that I have with Aaron, and Aaron's he's like one of my best buds, right? I've known him for a long time. We started in the cubicles together, right? So, and one of the things that there was a there was a property that he bought, and it was a small unit, an 8-unit building. And he's like, hey, come take a look at it with me. And we took a look at it, and I'm like, Aaron, this is a good deal. It makes sense. And we ended up partnering together. And we're like, Aaron could have taken that deal down, no problem. And he would have made a good ROI on it, right? And it's like, but what I found is a lot of it too is why I invested, or why we bought another commercial property together, and now we have another business venture that we launched that is actually going to probably be bigger than the real estate venture. That wouldn't have happened if he didn't have that long-term mindset, and by him saying, hey, Daniel, I'm going to bring you into this deal, he was looking at that, how I'm going to help Daniel build wealth by this asset instead of him taking it and hoard it all himself, which then, again, even though we've had this relationship, really in the last couple of years, we've found ways to merge our worlds together by investing together, just because our time is stretched in 100 different directions. And it's like, and I remember we were in Napa, and I'm like, dude, I think what we're failing to do is we're failing to marry our worlds together and bring them together so we could spend time with one another and align ourselves with one another. And it goes back to like, yeah, the best return on investment for Aaron would have been to take down that property by himself. But then again, he had that long-term relationships, right? And look at the magic that's happened in the last few years just by that one deal.
Awesome. I love it. Let's talk a little bit about due diligence. So you invest in, we talk about passive investing. Nothing is truly passive. Most of the time, the closest you can get is you put in the effort up front so that once you've now handed over your money, it's now passive. But there's still that effort up front, and there's that due diligence up front. And you mentioned what I believe and what most of the guests that I talk to all kind of echo is that the team is number one, the operator is number one, the investor is number one. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I assume that it's not just the operator and the team. What are some other things you look for? And I guess you're mostly specific to real estate, and whether it be single family, whether it be multifamily syndications, what are some of the other areas that you're going to look at and question during your due diligence to ensure that it's an investment that's going to meet your expectations and needs?
So the operator is super important, and so a lot of my experience comes from the fact that I've lost 7 figures in deals, right? So it's a lot of money, and when I go back and I see the common denominator of all of those, it was the jockey, right? And it hasn't just been real estate. You know, I've done some startup stuff, and the ideas are amazing. The ideas are all freaking great. A lot of the startup ideas are awesome, right? It's either not the right time or it's the wrong person that's taking it to the finish line, right? And then you lose. I think it's the same thing when it comes down to real estate. The asset class is sexy. The asset class is good. You got a B-class property, 300 units, right? Good area, good metro area. So the first thing you got to do is, number one, do you like that asset class? Do you like that property, right? And then really look at the operator and say, do they have revealed or communicative knowledge? Are they going to get their revealed knowledge using my money? Is this their first deal? Because there's a lot of guys out there and gals out there that have and digested a lot of podcasts, read a lot of books, but yet have never really taken down a syndicated deal, and at the same time have never really dealt with an asset where a market is changing, right? So I really look at that experience and say, okay, who are your investors? And then even talking to some of their investors, because when you're looking at, and I've bought, I have 150 units myself, right? So, I've looked at T12s, right? I know I've done performance myself. I could change one number and it changes everything, right? So the spreadsheets are really irrelevant, right? I also you have to have some form of an understanding of how a 70 unit apartment building or 100 unit apartment building works. So I do look at that, but the primary part of my underwriting is saying, okay, is this the operator and is this the team that I want to marry over the next 5-10 years?
Past performance too. A turkey can fly in a hurricane. So, there's a lot of guys out there that have had success in there, but you have to step away from it and go, is that a reward that the market gave them, or is that a reward because of what they did and their due diligence and their activities? And so taking a look at some of their past performance as well, and then analyzing that and going, is this a person who's just been riding the hurricane, or is this someone who has the skills to be able to adjust when things come? Because no matter what, we have no idea what's happening 5 years from now. I mean, we could have 2 different markets or 3 different markets, no matter what industry you're talking about 5 years from now. So is the person going to be able to make the adaptation?
Do they understand it? And so that's a great point, right? So with real estate, you don't lose money on real estate unless you have the inability to service the debt, right? I mean, you have liquidity, solid. We had a conversation with Robert Kiyosaki maybe 5-6 years ago at one of these events, and somebody called him out on his shit. He's like, I've never lost money in real estate. He's like, bullshit, you bought this property in Arizona And I know for a fact that it's dropped $2 million. And he looked at the guy straight in the eyes. He's like, have I sold that property? He said, no. It's like, I don't have the necessity to sell that property. I do not take that loss. I don't consider that a loss. And like what, a couple years ago, he developed it, made millions and millions and millions of dollars. So the question whenever you're dealing with the market and you're dealing with an investment that's an infinite investment, meaning real estate, wealth either starts or ends in real estate. So what is this jockey doing to protect a finite investment? Because right now we're dealing with tighter credit market. So how you underwriting this asset at a 7% rate with rents? What does that do with the 7 cap, right? Or what does that do with a 6 cap? What does that do to your performance? What does it look like for us to keep this property for 15, 20 years, right? And so when I see that they're addressing those, because with I think real estate in 20 years, no matter what you buy, it's still going to go up unless you buy a shitty property and it gets burnt down or the tenants take it over or whatever, or you have the inability to restructure the debt to make it perform. So I want to make sure that, if they have that, 5 or 7 year, loan with 25 amortized stock commercial loan, then what is your plan in your underwriting to address a increase in cap, right, or an increase in rate to service debt? What does that do to your investment? How are you planning that out? And there's a lot of people that are still underwriting property based on these rates are going to be low for the indefinite period of time, and it's like everything's going to be, compressed caps and all this other stuff, right? It's like, and yeah, that might be the case, but I really want to see what their plan is for the infinite period, even though it's a finite style investment.
I love that answer, and as somebody that does a lot of angel investing as well as real estate investing, first thing I ask when I invest in a business is I want to know what's your run rate. So how much cash do you have? How many months of cash do you have before you run out of cash? Mm-hmm. And too many of us assume that when we invest in real estate, if it's cash flowing, the run rate's infinite. We're never going to run out of cash. But that's not really true. Interest rates reset. You have to refinance or you have to get new loans. And if interest rates reset higher and you have to get new loans, then potentially your cash flow is compressed. And so it's very possible that there is a run rate in real estate, and you start with how long of a loan term do you have and what are rates going to do? And so too many of us assume that we'll just hold it for 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. And best case you will, but you also need to know what's the refinance plan and what happens if rates go up in 3 years when your bridge loan resets and you have to.
Aaron and I had a startup that we just, actually I don't know if you put money into it, but I just lost 50 grand last month, I think it was, on a startup, right, Sippy. Idea was awesome. The ideas are amazing. The properties are amazing. The problem with these startups is they run out of freaking money all the time. And if you cannot keep the people employed, that amazing idea goes home to rest, and then another company will come back and pick it up. Yep. And it's the same kind of lessons whenever you came back. You're in the business. You're in the business side. You've done some business ventures and stuff like that. How many ideas have you saw that were just amazing, but then the money just dried up, and then the idea died with the money?
Well, here's what I like to say. On the business side, I've never made an angel investment that's made money without the operator, the owners, pivoting. Like, pivoting is part of that business. You don't make money because nothing ever goes as planned. You have to be able to pivot, and those that pivot the best are going to do the best. Real estate's just the opposite. Anytime I've ever had a real estate investment where they had to pivot, it's generally because there's some catastrophic issue, and now it's just, let's try not to lose too much money. Let's lose as little money as possible. And so it is an interesting dichotomy between business and real estate and that ability to pivot and what pivot means. Let's talk about diversification. How do you think? So right now, it sounds like you have money in real estate, but also in some business. How do you think about diversification? Or maybe, and there's nothing wrong with this answer. I know you guys are young, probably younger than I am. And when you're young, diversification means less because you got more time. But do you think about diversification? And if so, how do you think about diversification in your passive portfolio?
And it kind of goes back to the 728 show that we were talking about at the beginning right now. Almost to a person that we've interviewed, and I mean all the way up to billionaires that we've interviewed, they were an inch wide and a mile deep for a long, long time. They earned mastery in whatever their wealth, their lane of wealth, right? And then there comes this point where you've got your, how much bandwidth does this take for me?
Mm-hmm.
And I've got this money coming in. So for Daniel and I both, our residential teams pay for our lives. So everything else for us is just taking bandwidth from us. And so there comes a point where your wealth reaches a point where you have more money than what your bandwidth is able to handle. And at that point, that's when I started building out legs of just diversification. And the ultimate goal is to insulate yourself in such a way that if the stock market tanks and businesses go bad, you have something that's going to do well. If the real estate market turns, and that you have something that's going to do well, so that when you do want to stop playing the game, and I don't know that I ever want to stop playing the game. I mean, and I'm sure, again, a lot of your listeners feel this way, is it's fun. It's a fun game, but you're trying to create enough options for yourself to where I'm always thinking about being insulated and having the cash flow available. If my business did die tomorrow, am I going to be able to pull cash flows from different places to be able to support my life? So that's really kind of how I look at diversification. I'm open to everything, because there's opportunity everywhere, and if it's the right person and it makes sense, I'll do it, even if it's not an industry that I'm really know that much about. I mean, Daniel and I both just invested last year into a fintech company, or a fintech fund, basically. But the guy's a rock star, and it's totally different than anything else I've done before, and I'm glad, because that's a place that I know, no matter what happens or whatever happens, that's another place where I'm insulated, separate from everything else.
Love that.
I'm more of I look at everything very technical. So
He does.
I have a lot of spreadsheets, and there's sometimes my brain works a little different way. So to answer your question on technical, how I break down my portfolio is very simple, because some of your listeners are LP investors, some of them are GPs that are raising for looking for LPs. So let's talk about that. 35% or so of my wealth is in an LP position, right? So let's so if that's my position, then and if you're releasing control of that money for somebody else to steward, you need to diversify that risk. So within that, I always tell myself, and I have a really good investor, I'll name drop them, Crusader Partners, Ryan Suela, Joe, amazing people. They've done great work for me. I think they have $1 million. I have $1 million something with them, and he's like, hey, we got another fund, we got another deal, and I'm like, sorry, dude, love you, but it doesn't fit my criteria, because I told myself that I would give no GP more than 10% of my net worth, right? So as you get there, so I will continue to invest with them as my net worth continues to increase. So those principles have to be very clear. And at the same time, they have $1 million of, say, of mine, a little more than $1 million. It's broken up with at least a half dozen assets as well. So you diversify, you got one GP, diversify that risk in different assets, and yet the other ones are other GPs. So my goal is to have 5 GPs that I really trust, that I have 2 to 3 investments, maybe 4 investments with them, and that are all humming at $1 million, $1.2 million, $1.5 million in managed, right? Because I understand I want exposure to that. I'm looking at return on mental capacity. I'm also looking for exposure in that asset class. So I have Samara Road, which I'm working to get them to $1 million, but they're all in industrial triple net deals. I mean, they just secured a loan from Chase at a 2%, right? I'm like, it's pretty amazing, and their cash on cash is 14% return, and they're an absolute closed fund, so you can't even get in there. The only reason I had access to them is because I invested to have an opportunity for access, and they gave me access to them. So when it comes down to the LP positions, and the reason why it's 35% is because I also understand that there are 4 C's that a human usually goes through, right? It's like, if you want to learn to, like in a business, you have to, or in investments, you have to, number 1, commit that I'm going to buy this asset class. Number 2, you got to earn courage, which means you got to face fear, go through shit. I'm not going to pull the trigger, the learning lessons. But if you do that, then you're going to learn, and you're going to find out what you're capable of. And once you find out what you're capable of, you're going to get to know what your capacity is in that asset class, and that's called revealed knowledge. It's what you want out of a GP. So I also understand that I need to learn that from myself. So if you keep outsourcing as an LP, that sea of courage, because you're never taking down a property yourself. You never find out what your capability is, and you never find out what your capacity is. So part of my investment strategy is also getting my hands dirty and understanding that, yeah, it's going to take some mental capacity, but I'm earning those 4 C's to eventually level up the assets in the future. So the rest, like 60% of my other stuff is all in real estate that I own, whether it's commercial, apartment buildings, just a bit of everything. And then we, of course, have access to business startup and a little bit of crypto. But again, it goes back to the same decision as one GP. If I buy into a certain deal, if that goes to zero, it's not going to collapse anything, right? If that one GP becomes a Bernie Madoff at the same time, it's going to sting, but it's not going to tear me down. Yep. My goal when I'm investing is to have an infinite investment mindset, right? And in order to have that infinite mindset, you need to make sure that you're in the game forever, right? And if you go big enough on one deal and it goes to shit and you're out of the game, you're done. You lost, right? So a lot of my strategy is based on staying in the game for an indefinite period of time, and I diversify a lot of that in that manner.
Not necessarily highest risk, highest reward, but slow and steady wins the race.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so a lot of our listeners are in real estate. You guys are obviously both well versed in real estate, both from the active and the passive side. And if we want to talk about outside of real estate as well, I'll ask a general question. We're recording this very beginning of May. We've already seen one rate hike by the Fed last month. We're likely to see a half-point rate hike next week, driving bond rates up, driving mortgage rates up, which so far hasn't driven cap rates up, but could drive cap rates up. Where, and I know you don't have a crystal ball, and I'm not going to ask you a prediction, but how are you starting to or thinking about investing differently moving forward? And how should we be thinking about, from, I guess, owning a home standpoint, since you guys run sales teams, moving forward? What do you think the impact is going to be on the market, and how are you thinking about investing differently based on what's going on macroeconomically?
You know, I think, and from the multifamily, the bigger stuff, that's a totally separate conversation, because that's a different world, and it's going to be affected very differently, I think, than the residential real estate side of things. The residential real estate side of things, I still believe, is probably as fundamentally sound and strong as it has ever been, because we have such a housing shortage, and there's nothing on the horizon that looks like it's going to fix that part of the equation. So if interest rates continue to rise, and you know, there's always black swan events or rates going to 10 or 11%, which would change things some. But you know, at the end of the day, as long as there's a shortage of inventory, you're going to see a fundamentally sound market. Do I think it's going to slow down? You know, depending on what rates do, there could definitely be a slowdown. But as far as a pullback or anything like that, unless things dramatically change, I don't see that on the horizon.
Yeah, I think you could control. It's a supply demand thing, right? Okay, increase the supply, market correct itself. How do you increase the supply? Affect affordability. How do you affect affordability? Increase the rate, right? It's going to solve the supply issue, slow the market down, but it's not going to fix the issue of the tenant, right? They can't find a place to live. We have a fundamental housing crisis right now. We've underbuilt this, we've underbuilt for the last decade by 5-6 million housing units, or just doors, right? So the people that are 22 to 33, the first-time home buyer is 33 years old. Number one, okay, they might have more homes on the market. Maybe they can find a place. But even the kids that are 23 to 33 that are living home with mom and dad that want to move out, they can't. Right? And if they do find a place, they can't afford it. That's a fundamental housing issue. Part of the American dream that we had was home ownership, right? It's like you could own a piece of land, right? In Europe, it's a novelty to own a property. We might be getting to that part where it's going to become a novelty to own a property in the U.S. It's a fundamental housing issue. So now to answer your question, if somebody's saying, should I buy a house today, right? Well, it goes back to the same thing. Do you have a finite plan? Are you going to be gone in 5 years? If so, rent, right? If you have an infinite mindset, meaning it doesn't matter 5, 10, and you mean 10, 15, 20 years, buy a property. Trust me, you're going to be very happy you did. But I agree with Aaron. I think we have a fundamental housing crisis, and yeah, they could increase the supply by maneuvering and manipulating the rate, but there's still a huge supply issue when it comes down to livable apartments and just units for some of those young people that can't find a place to live right now.
Love it. Okay, last question. I'm going to put you both on the spot. Best piece of investing advice you can give to our listeners that you haven't mentioned yet?
I already went to all my go-to ones. You got it, Daniel?
The first thing that comes to my mind is just your principles have to be. You have to know your principles cold, right? And the tactics might change, but the principles don't, right? So just understand what your fundamental principles and what your objective is.
Yep. And I often say investing is like negotiating. If you haven't written down where your limits are and what your needs are and what your wants are and what you're willing to give up, you're going to cross that line. And so physically writing it down is actually a smart way to go.
You know, in knowing them, it's like people think like, okay, I have a lot of rituals and habits, and I'm very disciplined. And people like, well, dude, you don't got any freedom. Like, you're not drinking, or you're going out partying or whatever. I'm like, no. My principles and my values give me freedom. It sets me free, because now I have the choice to decide whether I'm going to make that investment or not. I already know in my principles. So if you know your principles and you know what values you have and what your objective is, then that is the true freedom that you really want. Is knowing that. And a lot of people don't have enough clarity in that.
Love that.
And I have to go back to the one that I said before, and that is just, the best piece of advice that I ever got on building wealth was, the people who swing for the fences, you hear about them and you see them, and there's lots of glory given to them, but the guy that makes all the money is the one that puts the ball between second and third and first and second again and again and again and again and again. And then over time, every once in a while, the bat hits the ball perfectly and it's a double, and once in a blue moon, it hits absolutely perfect and it goes over the park. And so, I think that a lot of people should just focus on, is this a base hit, and be good with it, move on, and find the next deal.
I got to plug Wally, because he said one of the coolest things is that analogy of baseball. Have an aggressive swing but a safe line.
Love it. I love it. Awesome. Aaron, Daniel, for any of our listeners, if they want to check out the 728 show, well, they're going to have to join GoBundance to do that. But if they want to learn more about you, more about what you're doing, maybe want to reach out and contact you, what's the best way to get in touch?
Probably Instagram for me. It's the Aaron, AARON.West.
I think that's what all the cool kids are doing now, Instagram. So I guess
you're not doing TikTok?
Yeah. Aaron does have some cool dance moves on TikTok, probably. I would say Instagram, same thing, or just get connected, man. Like, you have access to a lot of people. You have an ability, if you have an opportunity to join GoBundance, join a tribe. And get connected through us that way. The 728 is an amazing show. It's an amazing opportunity for a lot of these brothers to be a fly on that wall and get to really get an inside view behind the curtains of how somebody build wealth, man. It's an amazing journey every time we interview people.
I love it. Guys, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Jay.